So hi grade 11 students, welcome to another pre-recorded video under Stoichiometry. In this pre-recorded video, we will tackle about empirical and molecular formulas and how are we going to solve for these formulas given a certain problem. But first, let's define what is an empirical formula and what is a molecular formula. So when you say molecular formula, these are actually the actual numbers of a certain atom of every element in a certain compound. So take for example, you have glucose. So C6H12O6. That means this is the exact number of atoms in every element of glucose. There are 6 carbon, there are 12 hydrogen, and you have 6 oxygen. That is what you mean by molecular formula. Now, how about empirical formula? When you say empirical formula, sorry for that, that should be I. Okay, for empirical formula, it's actually the lowest form of the molecular formula. So technically, you are just lowering the number of atoms. Okay, in this case, for your molecular formula glucose C6H12O6, the empirical formula or the term in mathematics for this one is in lowest term. So you could actually have the answer CH2O because the GCF in their subscript is actually 6. So 6 divided by 6 for carbon, that would be 1. 12 divided 6, that would be 2. Then 6 divided by 6 will have 1. So this value that we have here, the so-called in lowest term, this is actually your empirical formula. Okay, and of course your molecular formula, which is the C6H12O6. Please do remember po that most of the time empirical formula and molecular formula are different, but there are also cases wherein your molecular formula is already your empirical formula. Later on, we will identify paano po natin malalaman what will be our empirical formula given the percentage value of every element in a certain compound. So again, that is the difference between empirical and molecular formulas. So let's have one example involving empirical and molecular formula. So we have here a problem. Naphthalene is composed of 93.7% of carbon and 6.3% of hydrogen. What is the molecular formula of your naphthalene if the molecular mass is 128 grams per mole? So pwede nyo ring sabihin na, Miss, bakit pa natin kailangan isolve? You can just directly search this one in the internet and you already have the formula for your naphthalene. Well, you're right, but we have here a problem that we need to answer. And you were asked, what is the molecular formula of this chemical compound, which is naphthalene? So, of course, hindi natin yan dadayain. But if later on, if you already have the answer and you wish to check your answer in the internet, it's fine. You can just search it. So, in empirical and molecular formulas, it will take a lot of a different strategy in solving for these different formulas. Tatandaan po natin that the empirical formula is always the lowest, parang naka-lowest term natin na formula compared to molecular formula. There are cases wherein they are just the same but not most of the time. Most of the time, hindi. Okay? Another thing about empirical and molecular formula, bibigyan ko na kayo ng idea. In the solution process, ang una natin laging makukuha will always be empirical formula. We will have another process or another solution for us to solve for the molecular formula. Okay, so we will have first the empirical formula, then right after that, we will now solve for the molecular formula. So let's start. So we only have percentage. Okay, that is our problem because we don't have the mass of your naphthalene here. That's why you're going to assume. Sa problem lang tayo nag-assume. So you have to assume, ang pinakamadaling i-assume na value is that you have 100 grams of a certain substance. So in this case, you have 100 grams of naphthalene. Why? Kasi mas madali siyang i-multiply. So kung nag-assume tayo that you have 100 grams, actually pwedeng kahit anong value. Okay? Pero medyo mahihirapan ka kapag ganun yung gagawin mo. So in this case, you assume that there is 100 grams para mas madali. Why? See here. you have 93.7% of carbon. And that we know, we are assuming that there is 100 grams of a certain substance. So all you have to do is to multiply 93.7 grams, 93.7% in 100 grams para malaman natin na in that 100 grams, ilang grams kaya si carbon, given if it's 93.7%. So, of course, it's 93.7 grams. A simple mathematics. So, you have carbon. Next is, of course, to identify your hydrogen. So, you have 6.3% of hydrogen times 100 grams because we assume that there's a 100 grams of your substance. So, you will also have 6.3 grams of hydrogen. Mind you, people, baka kasi nagsosolve kayo ngayon tapos bakit mali yung nakukuha ko? Please do remember that this is percentage, so you have to change it first into decimal place. In this decimal points. Decimal numbers. In decimal numbers. Now, after you already have the grams, okay, you assume that you have these grams of your carbon and hydrogen, we can now actually solve for the number of moles. That's the next step. Okay, so again, first step, you assume that you have 100 grams and identify the masses of each component of the compound. In this case, it's carbon and hydrogen only. So after assuming that you have 100 grams and for computing the number of grams of your elements in the compound, the second step is to identify how many moles are there in every compound. So that's why mole concept is very important kasi, diba, we are now going to use that mole concept here in empirical and molecular formulas, changing grams into mole. So we need the molar masses. So you have 93.7 grams of your carbon. We know that one. We already assumed that. Then, of course, you need to convert that one into mole. That's our goal. So you need to have grams of carbon in your denominator for you to cancel the grams of carbon. And of course, you have now the 1 mole of carbon in your numerator. So all you have to do is to get your periodic table and take a look at the molar mass of your grams of carbon. And there you will see it's 12.011. Then of course, simply divide and you will get the value 7.801 mole of carbon. Ganyan nakadali. Of course, next step, hydrogen naman. So you have hydrogen, which is 6.3 grams of hydrogen times, and every 1 mole of your hydrogen, you have 1.008 grams of hydrogen. So you cancel the grams of your hydrogen, you already have the mole of your hydrogen. Simple mole concept. So you have 6.250 mole of your hydrogen. Why is this important? Because we are now going to use that as our subscript in every element. Ano ibig sabihin ng miss na subscript? Ibig sabihin siya yung ilalagay natin sa baba ng every element. So, take a look at here. So, in carbon, you have 7.801 mole. Okay. Then, for hydrogen, you have 6.250 mole. Following the law of definite proportion, and law of multiple proportion, hindi po pwedeng 7.8 ang atoms natin. Tama? Kasi, we need a whole number. Hindi naman pwedeng hatiin si electrons, si protons na nandoon sa atoms. Okay? So, we need a whole number. So, we need to divide this one with the lowest number of moles among these two. Ano mas bababa? Si 6.250. So, you divide both of them by 6.25. And there you will get an answer of C. Si C ngayon ay magiging 1.25. Si H magiging 1. Again, another problem. Because we have here a 1.25 value. Okay, 1.25, it's a decimal number pa rin. So, we need to make sure na magiging whole number siya. So, it's a trial and error process. What number are you going to multiply 1.25 for you to get the first whole number? First whole number ha. So, hindi pwede si 1, hindi pwede si 2, hindi pwede si 3, pwede ngayon si 4. So, if you're going to multiply this by 4, you will actually get C5H4. Now, this here, ladies and gentlemen, is actually your empirical formula. It's the lowest term. Okay, parang naka-lowest form siya ng molecular formula. So, of course, hindi yan yung hinahanap ng problem because you were asked what is the molecular formula. So, we will proceed to the next step. Okay? Basta ang importante, we have the empirical formula already. So, the next step is to identify your molar mass because that is the unknown. Pero kung ang hinahanap ay empirical formula lang naman sa problem, then you're already done. Your answer now is C5H4. But why is it important to identify first what's your EF? Because we will be needing the molar mass of your EF. Okay? So, how are you going to solve for the molar mass? Of course, just simply find the molar masses of carbon and hydrogen, multiply it to the number of atoms that you have there. Hindi ko na ipapakita because we don't have the space anymore. So, for your C5, the molar mass of your C5H4 is equal to 64.087 grams per mole. So, I hope you get the same value. If not, kindly pause the video and solve first for the molar mass kung hindi pa masyadong ganun kabilis mag-solve ng molar mass. Next, let's identify now the what we called N. What's the importance of N? Si N ngayon, yung imumultiply natin kay empirical formula na value, na whole number, para makuha natin si molecular formula. Kasi sabi natin, this is the lowest. Okay, it's the lowest term. So, kailangan malaman natin what particular whole number are we going to multiply this one for us to solve for the molecular formula. So, your N here is equal to the molar mass of your molecular formula or the actual. Okay? The actual. So, it's the molecular formula, molar mass of your molecular formula. Usually, it's always given in the problem. And that would be 128 grams per mole. And that, we have the molar mass of your empirical formula. Okay, palitan ko yung actual para hindi kayo masyadong maguluhan. Gawin natin siyang molar mass of your molecular formula. So, the one that will always be given in the problem. Actually, most of the problem, hindi naman lahat. So, in this case, you have the molar mass of your molecular formula. That's the molecular mass. Okay, naka-mention dyan. So, you have 128 grams per mole divided by the molar mass of your empirical formula, which is 64 point. Okay, baka magtaka kayo saan galing to ha. So, i-pause nyo muna para ma-solve nyo yung yung molar mass ni empirical formula natin. So, you can now cancel, of course, the unit. So, what value will you get here? It's actually 2. So, that means we need to multiply our empirical formula C5H4 with number 2. Okay? Because in that case, we can now solve for our molecular formula. And what will be our molecular formula? That would be C10H8. This is now the molecular formula. That means we're already done because the asked question is already answered. And the answer is C10H8. So that's it for the first problem. So if you did not understand, kindly go back na lang, tapos, and so on and so forth. Now let's proceed to another problem. So we have here a compound, ethylene glycol. If you're watching some forensics movies or episodes, marami sa Netflix, nanonood ako nun. So you have ethylene glycol as an antifreeze. Okay, medyo delicate siya, especially if you're going to take a lot. Okay, it could actually kill a person. It contains 38.7% of carbon, and it contains 9.75% of hydrogen, and the rest is oxygen. So mamaya, alamin natin, of course, ano yung the rest na sinasabi dyan. The molecular weight of your ethylene glycol is 62.07 grams per mole. What is the molecular formula of your ethylene glycol? So, of course, for us to be able to identify the molecular formula of your ethylene glycol, which is an antifreeze, we need first to identify what is your empirical formula. So, let's follow the step that we have a while ago. And that is determining, assuming, the first step is to assume that you have 100 grams of the sample. And because you have 100 grams of sample and that you have for your carbon, percent of your carbon, percent of your hydrogen, and percent of your oxygen given in the problem. So for carbon, it's 38.7%. For hydrogen, it's 9.75%. And for oxygen is the rest. So, of course, alam natin that this percentage should always be equal to 100. So, you add these two, i-add nyo siya, subtract nyo sa 100, then you will get a value of 51.55%. Okay. Now, we assume that there is a 100 grams of sample, so we need to multiply this everything, every percentage that we have here into 100 grams, okay, for us to identify how many grams are there of every component. So, this is just an assume, nag-assume lang tayo. Pero we can get para naman the ratio just like what we did a while ago for naphthalene. So, you have here 38.7 grams. Baka may nag-isip na naman kayo, bakit 100? Kasi mas madali siya. Actually, kahit anong number pwede. Pero mas madali kapag ka 100. Kasi yan o, pwedeng sulat mo na lang 9.75 grams ng hydrogen. Then si oxygen, 51.55 grams. Without even using your calculator. Kasi 100 lang naman yan. Diba? Please don't forget to change your percentage into decimal number. Kasi percentage yan. Baka iba yung nakukuha nyo sagot. Now, we already have the grams. The next step is to identify the number of moles. So, you have, for your carbon, you have 38.7 grams of carbon. You multiply it with the molar mass. So, you have 12.011 grams of carbon in every 1 mole of your carbon. So, you cancel out now grams of your carbon. Now, you have the mole of your carbon as 3.222 mole of carbon. How about for your hydrogen? You have 9.75 grams of your hydrogen times, in every 1 mole of hydrogen, you have 1.008 grams of hydrogen. These are just molar masses, ha? Then you have here 9.673 mole of hydrogen. Then for the last one is 51.55 grams of oxygen. Multiply 2 in every 1 mole of your oxygen, you have 15.999 grams of oxygen. You cancel out the grams, then you now have the moles. And that is 3.222 mole of your oxygen. So the next step is to use these values that we have here as a subscript of every element in the compound. So antifreeze contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So for carbon, you have 3.222 as the number of mole. For hydrogen, you have 9.673. For oxygen, it's the same with carbon, 3.222. Now, you have to divide all of them by the lowest, okay, number of mole, and that would be 3.222. 3.222, 3.222. Then, you will get a molecular formula of C1H3O1. That means it's CH3O. This is the empirical formula of your ethylene glycol, which is the antifreeze. Of course, that's not the end because we are asked what is the molecular formula. So we need to find the value of your N. For you to find the value of your N, you need the molar mass of your molecular formula divided by the molar mass of your empirical formula. So this is your empirical formula. Kindly solve for the molar mass. So the molar mass that I get in solving for the molar mass of your empirical formula is 31.034 grams per mole. I hope we have the same answer. If not, kindly pause this video and solve for the molar mass. Then if you already have solved the molar mass of your empirical formula, then we're good to go because the molar mass of your molecular formula is already given in the problem. So you have 62.07 grams per mole and you have 31.034 grams per mole of your empirical formula. All you have to do is to cancel. If you divide that 1, you'll get a number 2. That means we need to multiply our empirical formula by 2. So you have CH3O times 2. So your molecular formula now will be C2H6O2. So this is now the chemical formula, the molecular formula in particular, of your ethylene glycol or the antifreeze. So I hope that you get this one. Okay, this is empirical and molecular formula. So that would be the end of this pre-recorded video. So we discussed here empirical and molecular formula. Just a recap. When you say empirical formula, it's the lowest form of your molecular formula. Lowest form in terms of the number of atoms that are in the subscript. And your molecular formula is your true formula. So there will be other compounds. Okay, there are a series or number of compounds wherein you will have the same empirical formula. Okay, but you will have a different molecular formula. That's why when you say molecular formula, it's actually the true formula kasi yun naman talaga yung formula niya. Okay? So, the first step, pag nagsasolve tayo, you assume what is the number of grams. So, in my case, I always use 100 grams. So, you could also use that. Then right after that, you identify the mass of every element. Then right after that, you identify the number of moles. You use the mole as the subscript of the different elements that are present in your compound. Then right after that, divide it by the lowest number of mole. Then the answer that you have there, just make sure that you don't have any decimal number. Because if you do, please make sure to find a number, the least number, wherein you could get those decimal numbers into whole numbers. Then right after that, you identify the n, which is the number that you're going to multiply to your empirical formula for you to get the molecular formula. And your n will be equals to the molar mass of your molecular formula divided by the molar mass of your empirical formula. That's why it's important to identify first what is your empirical formula before you can solve for your molecular formula. So again, of course, you could just search the internet and you could check if your answer is correct. If you also want to review, or you could also try more problems involving empirical and molecular formula, all you have to do is to surf the internet. There are a lot of problems, word problems, na may sagot na, and even solution. So, kailangan nyo lang, type lang, tapos sipagan nyo lang. Kaya nyo yan. Okay, so that would be the end of our, I guess this is the fourth pre-recorded video. The first video is the molar mass, computation of molar mass. Second video is the mole concept. Third video is the percent composition. And this is the fourth video involving stoichiometry, which is empirical and molecular formula. So I hope that this pre-recorded video helped you a lot. And if you have questions, just please leave it there in the comment section. And we will try to answer that during our synchronous meeting. So happy learning, grade 11. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.